What is up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Lance Corey.
I'm Juan Urseo.
And we're here for another bike comparison. Behind me, I have the 2024 Harley-Davidson Road Glide.
And behind me is my 2022 Harley-Davidson Road Glide Standard.
Now, Juan, they made this bike for a couple years. Do you remember exactly what years they had the M8 Road Glide in this chassis?
So in 2017, Harley introduced the M8 into the Road Glide, and they've been using it until 2023.
And for 2024, Harley-Davidson revamped that bike into this. And you're gonna notice some big changes, like the fairing styling, the bag styling, the tank styling, the infotainment center. But Juan and I are gonna get into some of the nitty-gritty stats and different things that changed on this bike. And then we're gonna get into kind of how we felt riding both of them.
Yep.
So let's get these papers and start reading. All right, so we have our cheat sheets and we're gonna read off some of the basic standards. This information is provided by Harley-Davidson. The pricing on the 2022 model bike, what did you pay for that thing? What are they listed at?
So MSRP is at $21,999. I got my bike for about $24,000 out the door.
Then on the 2024 model bike, it looks like they increased the base MSRP at $25,999. I believe we got this bike out the door with all the California taxes, license, and fees for right around $29,000 out the door. Now, one thing I'm gonna note that they did for this new model bike in 24, and I believe they'll probably keep doing it, now they're actually charging for the black colorway.
Right, on my year bike, the Vivid Black was standard. You didn't have to pay extra. But for the new bikes, it's how much more?
Color option, Vivid Black was $600.
Wow, okay.
So I think what Harley's trying to do is get more of their riders out there on colorful bikes and try to change out the all black Harley-Davidson mantra that they have. Keep in mind, this is the base model bike. This is the base model bike of their generations. What cubic inch did that bike come with stock from the factory?
So my bike was a 107.
107.
Yeah.
Now, in those years from the factory, they made the 107, 117, 114.
Yep.
But again, the base model bike was a 107.
Correct.
Now, 2024 and newer, the 117 is the base engine.
Yep.
They do have a couple models with the 121, and I'm sure they're gonna have bigger than that, but for the base model bike, the lowest bike you're gonna get from the factory right now is a 117. Let's go over kind of the comparison on the power. So
the 107 from the factory, it's claimed 111 foot-pounds of torque at the engine, not at the tire, so you're gonna have some drivetrain loss.
Then on this bike over here, it's claiming the engine torque at the engine is 130 foot-pounds.
That's a pretty big difference.
Yeah.
I'm surprised by that.
There is 10 more cubic inch. They do offer a horsepower number for this bike. They're claiming this bike has 105 horsepower. We couldn't find Harley's stats for the horsepower, but we did dyno Juan's bike stock engine with a pipe and an air filter, but no tune.
Correct.
What did it come out to?
It came out to 79.8, so almost 80 horsepower to the tire. So when you incorporate drivetrain loss, it was a little more than that, but that's still a pretty big difference, more than 15.
Now let's get into a couple key differences that really stood out to us. The rake on these bikes is the same.
Yep.
The steering head rake is a 26 degree.
Same on my bike.
The ground clearance on this bike, I believe, increased. We're at 5.7 inches of ground clearance on the new bike.
My bike, it's at 5.5, so it's a little bit less.
The seat height. So on the new bike, the stock seat height is 26.6 inches.
Seat height on a factory Road Glide standard this year is 25.9, so it is a little bit lower, which is good for a shorter guy like me.
But when we get into ground clearance, I think that bike has a little bit of a disadvantage in the ground clearance for turning. So the lean angle in degree on the 2024 model bike is 32 degrees on the left and the right.
So my bike, that's where it suffers a little bit. 31 degrees on the right, and I got 29 degrees on the left. So again, those are factory numbers. My bike's not factory, so.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right, is when we took this bike out and it was bone stock and we rode it through Angeles Crest,
we were scraping it.
I mean, I forgot how low a stock bike is compared to the way we set them up with our tighter floorboards, a little bit raised up floorboards. And really that's the only big difference we do.
I mean, you rode that bike and you scraped it off the back.
On accident. It scared me the first time. I leaned into the corner, I was like, oh my, I forgot how easy they scrape scrape right out of the box.
And you were able to jump on my bike right away and could not get it to scrape.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So my bike comes in at 855 pounds in running order. That means it has all the liquid stuff ready to rock.
And then this bike comes in at 838 pounds.
17-pound difference.
Yeah.
That's pretty good considering they look like there isn't that much of a difference. I mean, 17 pounds is pretty noticeable.
Totally. And one thing I want you guys to note, especially if you've never ridden a bigger bike like this, that 800 plus pounds out on the road, whether you're in a canyon or the highway, it doesn't feel like 800 pounds. Right. They're so fluid and they're actually so, I would say, comfortable to ride.
Yeah. They
really do have these bikes dialed in terms of geometry and rideability that it doesn't feel like 800 pounds. The only moment it does feel like 800 pounds is maybe if you come to a stop and you accidentally let it get a little too far, it's a little hard to stand up.
Yeah, I mean, I would say obviously the wheels have a different design or style, but they're the same sizing, same tires and rim specs.
Yep.
So that was interesting.
Well, I could say this, the gear ratios are the same. I saw that when I was going through.
They both have 6-gallon fuel capacity, to note.
6-gallon fuel capacity, but this bike has 44 miles per gallon.
And my bike is 43. So it's interesting that's one less, even though the new bike has 10 more cubic inches.
Yeah,
so I wonder how they did that.
They were able to get the fuel economy better on the new bike.
And also, one thing I did note is that the new 117 has a water-cooled heads. Cooler in here is actually for water versus mine, it's for oil. So that's another thing that they were able to improve on and get more performance out of that engine.
All right, so enough of these boring papers. I want to go into how I felt when we pulled the bike out off the showroom floor. I've been an owner of a 2020 Road Glide, which ultimately is the same chassis and styling as this bike. Big differences were the gauges and the radio. That was huge, and the other big difference was the headlight look.
Yep.
Those three components were what really threw me off. They really tricked my mind. I was missing having the analog gauges. I really enjoy having the analog gauge not connected to my radio. I like my radio doing its own thing, and I like seeing the tacks move, and I like seeing something that's real moving, not a screen moving.
Yeah, and I respect that. I think there is something nice to having those gauges, but I'm also not against having the nice infotainment. One thing that's rad is you could tailor your gauges, right? You can have one in the middle, you can change the positioning of it, and you can have different styles. So although I do miss the analog gauges, I think the digital one is pretty rad in terms of functionality and having that much room to display like trip data, fuel economy, your navigation. So
one thing though, the navigation is a monthly subscription. So if you want that and you want to use it, be prepared to pay the monthly subscription, right?
On the new bikes.
On the new bikes.
On the old bikes, if you have nav, it's working, you don't have to pay. So that's...
Luckily, I think most of us have a cell phone in our pocket that's good enough in terms of that. You plug it in, and you can get that information up on the screen. But another thing when I rolled off, and I wasn't sold on right away, is this headlight. I really appreciate Harley's styling over the last 100+ years that they've had the round headlight. They've kept that styling where their tanks are all rounded, their headlights are all rounded, and that's been something that's been so iconic to the Harley-Davidson brand. And then they came out with this 2024 model bike, and the gas tank has some harder edges on it. The headlight has, again, sharp lines. I don't see any bit of roundness inside of the LED section. I was thrown off, but as soon as you hopped on that 24 model bike and I was watching you ride it, on the road, it does look pretty mean.
Yeah.
It does look good, it does look aggressive, and it's kind of growing on me.
I had the exact same reaction. When I saw it online, I wasn't too stoked on it. But yeah, I mean, that first ride home from the dealership, and it was just cruising on the highway, and the sun was hitting it, and we were getting the side profile, it was rad. From that moment, I was I started warming up to it, and right now, I think it looks pretty cool. I definitely think it's more modern looking, and it made my bike look and feel a little bit older.
Yep.
Versus when I first saw it, I thought my bike was dude, this is rad, and then the new bike, I thought it was a little weird. It's growing on me for sure.
All right, I have to say, one of the things, since we're up here in the fairing and the front end, that we both noticed when we hopped on the new bike is that the front brakes felt night and day better. You know, the rotors look very similar. The calipers on the forks look similar.
Yep.
The biggest noticeable difference is the brake reservoir and the master cylinder.
Yeah.
Those look different up on the handlebars. I don't know the exact reasoning. I don't know if that is a stronger master cylinder or if there is a big improvement to the brake calipers. But I will say that the braking on the front end of this bike has improved quite a bit, and I'm really happy with the braking on it.
Yeah, for sure. I think from the very first moment I hopped on it and I felt the front brake. It was interesting. It felt like it had good bite. It wasn't overly sensitive, but it felt like very reassuring. Like, you know, if you gave it 10% more, it was going to stop 10% more, versus like on my bike, I felt like I would give it 10% more brake, but it wasn't really helping that much. So yeah, I think that was a good improvement and something that I've been stoked on the new bike.
While we're up there, the throttle. How much softer the throttle on the 2024 model bike is, spins with, I would say, half the effort as the older model bike, your bike. And with that, the throttle like response is really on point, almost scary on point. And if you have the bike in sport mode, it's 0 to 30, and like how fast it happens in the throttle is incredible. Like almost like kind of like can jerk your head a little bit.
Yeah, I think in sport mode, the bike is very responsive. And then because it's so light, can get a little jerky. I think it's fun to ride in sport mode. You just have to get used to it. When you're cruising it, I wouldn't ride it on sport mode. Like you mentioned, I personally like the feel of the spring on the older bike where you have a little bit more resistance.
Yep.
It almost feels like you're getting more feedback even though you're technically not. It's just easier mentally to modulate it.
It feels more like a bike that had a carburetor or even a cable pull throttle where you're twisting the throttle body yourself.
Yeah.
That's the resistant this older bike feels like. Where this new one feels a little bit more like you're playing with a video game system.
Simulator or something.
Yeah, it's totally different. We're kind of going back and forth because we do hop on a lot of different bikes. We do hop on carbureted FXRs, carbureted Dynas, EFI, but cable pull Dynas, and then into this throttle by wire assembly. Those all feel very similar, but then when you get on this one, it feels really, really light.
Yeah, I think it's something that everyone that has ridden this bike pointed out, like, oh man, the throttle is super light. So you can get used to it for sure, and if this is your first bike, you wouldn't notice a difference. For us, knowing that we ride bikes that are older than us to bikes that are newer than us, we definitely can compare and feel that difference.
Learning the new like hand controls on this bike was a feat in itself. Harley-Davidson has used the hand controls for, don't quote me, and I'm sure someone's gonna have a better number than me, but sometime in the late 80s, they were already using the switches that were all in the same position. Sometime in 90s, they kind of like rounded them off a little bit more. And then they've had those same hand controls or dang close to it for almost 30 years. And now they have these hand controls where there's buttons on the top, controls on the front. I get it, it's to control this computer.
For sure, the screen has so many more features, so you need a lot more buttons, but you can get used to it. I haven't ridden that bike on a really long road trip, so every time I get on it, I'm still like, where's the cruise control? I don't think that's a negative thing. It's just gonna take some getting used to if you're riding older bikes.
If you've been riding Harleys for a couple decades, or even if you've had only one Harley, but maybe for 2-3 years, you're gonna hop on this new Harley and it's going to be quite a bit different, like to get used to where the high beam is and where the cruise control is, even where the start button is.
And one of the kind of like funny things is like on the new bike, to start it, you don't have to hold it. You just like tap the start button and the bike fires up. That's one of the things I catch myself like tripping up, going back and forth between bikes. Like on my bike, you have to hold it, and every other Harley before that. And on the new bike, you just tap it once and it starts. So it's a little trippy, but you get used to it.
As we move further back on these bikes, we noticed that the foot controls are the same. I think the frame's pretty close to the same. Don't quote me, someone may know that there's a difference, but overall, like I said, the rake is the same, foot control mounts are the same. They both have M8 engines in them. So overall, that area of the bike is very, very similar. On the base model bike, it is the VVT cam cover. I think it's just like a normal cam. I think it's just they use the same cover. I'm not sure what else is going on in here with the electronics.
I think it has an additional sensor in there that my bike doesn't have, but it definitely does not have the VVT, only the CVO.
And not all CVOs.
Right.
Certain models have the VVT, certain models have different cams. Does not have variable valve timing is what VVT stands for. But it does have a little bit of a different look there. We went over that the gauges, they originally were attached to like the kind of the trees, and they move with the bars. Juan's bike here, we put a lot of our Thrashin components on it, and we adjusted where that is. We adjusted the bars and risers. And we can kind of talk about that right now. How simple the new model bike has been to work on. Juan's bike, we do have the 9.5 pullbacks with our Thrashin mid-bend bars. You need to do the gauge relocation, and you also need to do the top tree. Now, if you come over to the new bike, it's a little bit more plug and play, where actually, since there is no gauge, you don't need to do a gauge relocation. It's all in the infotainment system. But we do have the same 9.5 pullbacks with our Thrashin mid-bend bars. These both are running the stock cables, but one thing that we notice is how much simpler it was to do the install. The nacelle that wraps around, there's no cutting that's needed to do it. It's very plug and play, a couple bolts. And I think the install for something like this took us maybe an hour,
yeah.
Where that might take 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah, I mean, like you pointed out earlier, on my older style bike, the gauges are built into this nacelle and you have to trim it or cut it. On the new bike, I think Harley was definitely looking out for us that like to modder bikes, and made it way easier to put the risers on. Like you said, the wiring, the connectors are really small. Everything flows in the bars really well. So yeah, maybe an hour with your buddies, you should be able to throw a bar and riser setup, change the look of your bike and feel. So super stoked on that.
The bag capacity. We did read on the stats. I'll grab the paper. You know what? Let's uncrumple the paper.
Let's uncrumple the paper.
All right, I crumpled my paper, but I'm gonna bring it back out. I'm just gonna read off to you guys. Luggage capacity volume, 2.42 cubic feet.
Mine is 2.3 cubic feet, which is interesting because I felt like my bags looked a lot smaller.
If you check this out at this angle, you're gonna notice that on the newer bike, I feel like the old bags were here, and this extra bit is kind of where that 0.1 is coming from.
Yeah, they're definitely more bulbous, more round.
You lose a little bit with this angle, I think, right? Because you're gonna get a little bit more on yours where it's like that. You know, I think the size is very similar to, both bikes have basically the same capacity.
Yeah.
But you'll visually notice kind of how much rounder the bike looks from behind.
Yeah, I don't think that 0.1 cubic feet difference would be a deciding factor for anyone.
We do want to point out a couple things. They may be obvious to some and they may be totally not thought about. You pointed something out right away.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we didn't talk about, both of these bikes have 49 millimeter front ends, so same diameter tubes.
One thing that I just noticed looking back over the bike, the horn is hanging off between your cylinders on the B side on the older model bike. The horn is behind this, right? If you go over on the side of this bike, you're gonna notice that the ignition coil is hanging off between the cylinders. It is a cool look, but then the horn is down here by your feet. You're also gonna notice while we are over here is the water-cooled system kind of overflow tank is on the side of the frame right here. A little bit obtrusive looking in my opinion. If I didn't have to have it, I wouldn't, but that is a mechanical piece that you can't get rid of. All right, so the question that I think everybody has. Juan, you have this bike. Are you jumping out of your seat to get over into this bike? What do you love about this one? What do you love about this one? What's the deal? What do we got going here?
All right, so for me, this is my 2022 Road Glide Standard, and I've dialed it in to exactly how I like it. I think the new bike is freaking sick. It's fast. It's a good base out the box, but I'm gonna keep my bike. I'm not gonna start all over at a higher price. I think with the money I saved getting my bike, I put a cam in it, I put an exhaust in it, I put bars and risers. It's dialed perfect, the suspension, the looks. I changed the bar, I put the spoiler. I freaking love my bike. I got the floorboards, I got the shift arm. Basically, I threw a Thrashin catalog at it and it freaking dialed the bike in. I don't think it's worth me selling it and starting all over on the new bike. I just love my bike too much. The cam, the tune, it really woke up the bike, and speed difference, I don't think there's enough for me to justify like starting all over. And like I said, everything's kind of just tailored exactly to how I like it. And I just don't want to go through that process over again. If the bikes were like significantly different, maybe I would reconsider that. But as they stand like this, I'm keeping my bike.
That's a great point, and I'm with you on that. I'm gonna give you my opinion why as well. But we have our buddy, Supercross winner, Cely, who is bikeless right now. He actually had a 2020 Road Glide. He's ridden it to Sturgis. It had the 114 on it. Since he's been hanging out at Thrashin, we've been letting him ride the 2024 model bike that's behind us. He's put over 1,000 miles on this thing. So I wanna get his quick idea of what he thinks about riding it so far, if he's gonna go ahead and get one of these, or if he's gonna be in search of one of these for his next bike.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what he has to say.
All right, Cole, you were there the day that we picked up this bike right here. The three of us all got to ride it the first day we got this bike, but ever since then, I've been back on my 2020, and you have been the one putting over 1,000 miles on this 2024 model bike. So give us the feedback. What do you think?
We're kind of in the business of picking bikes apart too, so we're very meticulous when it comes to details. I think right off the bat, like when I hopped on it, the first two things I noticed were the controls and the new look. I guess it's before I hopped on it, but to reiterate what you said, I didn't like the fairing wearing. I love it now. I didn't like the hand controls, mostly kind of going back to what you said. Harley's always been in the same position. Even going onto this bike, I like where the infotainment controls were on that bike. And now with the new generation, after 200-300 miles, you get used to it. It becomes, you know, second nature to where all the new controls are. You mentioned modding them. Modding it is incredibly easy. Throwing the bars, risers, foot controls, all that. We did it within like 2 hours. One thing that I noticed right off the bat, I don't think you guys touched on it, was the suspension. Front suspension on this, night and day better than the old bikes.
Really?
I think all of us were completely unhappy with our bikes until we got a set of Legends front springs.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really think about that because I'm doing the comparisons riding premium suspension on our bikes. Like you said, Legends
Those
built
were
suspension.
incredibly divey. Coming into any kind of tight turn, you felt it bottoming out. It felt wishy-washy.
Yeah.
This, we haven't touched anything and it feels great.
You're right. I didn't even think about that, and I'm happy that we brought him on because look at that, a whole other opinion, and he's noticing how much better this suspension feels built already. Almost.
Yeah, I've talked to customers that have bought this that have come to our showroom and talked to them about how much more they like the suspension too.
Yeah.
I think that's just like number one thing when you're a very intuitive rider and you like know your bike very well. That's one thing, like going into turns, you can trust that it's not going to dive, it's not going to try and wallow. The new suspension is great.
Yeah, and even with that being said, I remember when the bikes were stock, like Juan's bike was stock, you could kind of blow through the rear suspension pretty quick if you hit a bad dip. I feel like when I've ridden this, I have never noticed that.
Yeah, turns, anything, I felt that was, I don't know what they were doing with their spring rates, but they figured out with this bike. I know you mentioned rake is the same, but it does feel like an entirely different bike just because of the suspension.
Wow, so suspension upgrades, we're saying that the brakes are better. We know that right off the bat, the engine's more powerful, it's more responsive, you're getting better gas mileage. Those seem like some pretty key features that are like worthy.
I mean, the big question is like, if you own that bike, do you upgrade or not even really upgrade? Do you transfer to the new year?
Yeah.
If I owned your guys' bikes, if I still owned my 2020, the answer to the question is no. I'd keep what I have, with triple clamp setup, the gauge relocation, all that time,
you're
money.
saying with the mods you've already done to a bike like that.
I'm keeping that bike. If I didn't own a bagger, if I was going to Sturgis or gearing up for Sturgis this year and I wanted to buy a bagger, I would probably look for one of these before, just because you can put bars and risers on it in an hour. You can do foot controls if that's, want to get even more adjustability and more comfort out of it. The ease of upgrades to this is night and day better from that, but I still love that bike. I still love the look. I still love the ergonomics. I love everything about that bike still.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of my standpoint on it as well. Is like, I have the 2020 model bike and I had the opportunity and choice, which bike did I want to ride to Arizona? I could have asked Cole, hey, hop on my old Road Glide. I'm riding the fresh one. For some odd reason, I decided I wanted to ride my old one. I liked where it was at, where it's set up. I liked the power it already has. I like you said, the ergonomics of the hand controls. I rode my old bagger to Arizona 1,000 miles just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and again, you like the analog gauges. I like them too. I started to like this a lot. Like, this was another thing where it's like tit for tat. Like, you're not going to get many benefits either way you go. They're both great bikes. Yeah. I think you're going to be happy. But it goes back to, if I owned one of those, I'm keeping that. Yeah, but if you are walking into a showroom and both of them were brand new, let's say there was a 2022 model bike that had never hit the road before, it's sitting right next to a brand new 2024 model bike. It's never hit the road before. Both of them are listed at the MSRP that they were listed for when they first came out. Which one are you gonna grab? I'm going 24. I'm probably gonna go 24. Another thing that when we hopped on it, I forgot to mention was the power. Like, I think you guys might have touched on that. The power on this straight out the box is noticeably different. Like, when we went to the drag races, this was pretty damn quick. Like, this kept up with you guys a lot better than I thought it would. Yeah, I mean, this thing kept up with my cammed 117 CVO. All right, Cole, I'm really glad that we brought you on camera because seriously, you did bring up some points that Juan and I both didn't think about. Your opinions were greatly appreciated. All right, so there you have it. I think we all kind of came to the exact same conclusion. Yep. We've all put thousands and thousands of miles on road glides over the last couple years. We would kind of keep our already dialed in previous gen road glide. Yeah, for sure. I don't think none of us are gonna run to sell our bikes to hop on the new one. But we also agreed that if we didn't have a road glide and we were getting into one, we would probably just go to the newest gen and start getting that thing dialed in. Yeah, I think out the box, it is noticeably better, higher starting point, and it'll be a little bit easier to get it to your liking. We hope that this video helped you guys have a better understanding of what they did to improve the 2024 model bike, the comparisons of these two, and I really hope that it didn't scramble your brains as much as it did ours talking about it. Thank you guys for checking this video out. Juan, I appreciate your feedback on both of these bikes. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you guys in the next one. See you later.